In 1950, American radios wrapped families in the gentle reassurance of Patti Page's Tennessee Waltz. 6 years later, Elvis Presley's swinging hips on The Ed Sullivan Show were deemed so dangerous that cameras were ordered to film him only from the waist up. How did a restless sound born in a tiny Memphis studio change everything forever?
Welcome to Top Spot 40 Music Docuseries, where we bring the stories behind the music to life.
The Fabulous Fifties picture. America in 1950. The boys have come home from war. New houses are popping up in tidy rows, each with a gleaming refrigerator and a television set in the living room. Families are growing, hope is in the air. And somewhere in the background, a new sound is beginning to stir. It wasn't loud yet, not at first. The radio still belonged mostly to the smooth voices that had carried everyone through the hard times. Perry Como, Patti Page, Rosemary Clooney, and the ever-elegant Tony Bennett. Their songs wrapped around you like a favorite cardigan. Come On to My House. Tennessee Waltz. How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? They were gentle, reassuring, and perfectly polite. But beneath that polished surface, something restless was waking up. In black churches and roadhouses across the South, gospel and rhythm and blues had been cooking for years. In Memphis, a former disc jockey named Sam Phillips opened a tiny studio on Union Avenue because he had a dream. He said he was looking for a white man who could sing with the feeling of a black man. He had no idea how soon that wish would be answered. First, though, the fuse was lit by a Kentucky-born father of 6 named Bill Haley. When his band, the Comets, released Rock Around the Clock in 1954, it barely made a ripple. Then Hollywood came calling. The song was dropped into the opening credits of a gritty film about juvenile delinquency called Blackboard Jungle. Suddenly, teenagers were hearing that opening guitar riff and leaping out of their movie seats. They danced in the aisles. They took the music outside and kept dancing on sidewalks and in parking lots. Rock and roll had just announced itself to the world, and the world would never quite sit still again. Then came the boy from Tupelo. Elvis Presley walked into Sun Records in the summer of 1954 carrying his guitar and a world of nervous energy. When he cut That's All Right, Sam Phillips knew his search was over. The record hit the airwaves in Memphis, and the phone lines at the radio station lit up like a Christmas tree. Girls screamed, boys tried to copy the way he moved. By the time Elvis appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1956, the camera operators were under strict orders to show him only from the waist up. His swinging hips were considered dangerous. To a whole generation of teenagers, they were the most exciting thing they had ever seen. But Elvis wasn't alone on the train. A freight car full of brilliant young artists climbed aboard with him. From New Orleans came the gentle giant Fats Domino, whose warm smile and rolling piano made hits like Blueberry Hill feel like Sunday Supper and Saturday Night all at once. Little Richard exploded out of Macon, Georgia, wearing more makeup and energy than most people saw in a lifetime. When he screamed, "A wop bop-a-loo bop-a-lop bam boom" on Tutti Frutti, it sounded like the future crashing into the present at full speed. Chuck Berry took the music up Highway 66. With songs like Johnny B. Good and Maybelline, he turned the electric guitar into a storyteller. His duck walk, his witty lyrics, his perfect marriage of country swing and blues grit, it all added up to something brand new. Kids who had never picked up a guitar suddenly wanted one. They wanted to move like Chuck Berry. And then there was the unhinged genius from Faraday, Louisiana, Jerry Lee Lewis. They called him the Killer, and he earned every letter of that nickname. When he kicked the piano bench across the stage and pounded the keys with his feet while singing Great Balls of Fire, parents reached for their smelling salts and teenagers reached for the volume knob. His marriage to his 13-year-old cousin would eventually slow him down. But in those first white-hot years, Jerry Lee played like a man who knew the party couldn't last. While the boys were shaking things up, another sound was drifting from the street corners of New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago. Young black singers in matching sweaters stood under lampposts harmonizing in tight, heavenly chords. They called it doo-wop after the nonsense syllables they used to fill out the background. The Platters asked us to remember only you. The Drifters took us under the boardwalk. The Flamingos gave us I Only Have Eyes for You, a record so beautiful it still feels like floating. These songs were pure romance, the soundtrack for first kisses and slow dances under crepe paper streamers at the high school gym. Not every voice was rough or rebellious. The music business, nervous about the wild new sound, tried to smooth out the edges. Clean-cut young men like Pat Boone were handed rhythm and blues songs and asked to make them safe for white living rooms. He took Little Richard's Tutti Frutti and made it sound like a church social. Some called it theft. Others saw it as the complicated way that music crossed the color line in a still segregated country. Either way, the genie was out of the bottle. Once teenagers heard the real thing, they went looking for it on black radio stations and in the bins at the record store. And the girls had their heroes too. Brenda Lee was belting out Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree before she could drive. Connie Francis sang with a heart-on-her-sleeve honesty that made Who's Sorry Now feel like a letter from a best friend. And in Detroit, a young woman named Aretha Franklin was already singing in her father's church, though the world would have to wait a few more years for her to fully claim her throne. By the late 50s, the music had grown so powerful that adults began to worry. Radio DJ Alan Freed, the man who had coined the phrase rock and roll, found himself at the center of the payola scandal, accused of accepting bribes to play certain records. Politicians held hearings. Preachers warned that this devil music would corrupt the nation's youth. Some cities even tried to ban rock and roll dances. But the kids kept dancing. They kept buying records. They kept dreaming about being free in ways their parents never imagined. Then came the winter day that still hurts to remember. On February 3rd, 1959, a small plane carrying Buddy Holly, Ritchie Valens, and the Big Bopper crashed in an Iowa cornfield. Buddy Holly had only been famous for 18 months, but in that short time he had shown the world what a thoughtful, bespectacled kid from Lubbock, Texas could do with a guitar and a pair of glasses held together by tape. Peggy Sue. That'll Be the Day. Rave On. He wrote his own songs, produced his own records, and inspired a generation of British kids who would soon form bands with names like the Beatles. When he died, the papers called it the day the music died. But of course, the music didn't die. It simply changed its clothes and kept traveling. As the decade drew to a close, the sound began to soften again. The teen idols arrived, Frankie Avalon and Fabian, handsome boys pushed by television and fan magazines. The music got sweeter, the hair got shorter, and for a moment it seemed as if the wild rebellion might settle down. But the fire lit in the 50s was still burning underground. In Memphis, a young truck driver named Elvis had already changed everything. In Detroit, Berry Gordy was quietly building Motown. In Liverpool, John, Paul, George, and Ringo were learning their chords by listening to American records played on portable record players. Looking back now, the Fabulous 50s feel like one long, breathless moment when everything was possible. It was a time when a truck driver's son could become the king of America. When poor kids from the South could walk into a studio with nothing but talent and walk out as legends. When music stopped asking permission and started demanding to be heard. The clothes have changed. The cars are different. But every time you hear a great guitar riff cut through the air, every time a voice on the radio makes you close your eyes and remember what it felt like to be young and full of longing, you are hearing the echo of those magnificent years. The 50s gave us more than just songs. They gave us permission to move, to feel, to fall in love out loud, and to believe that our own voices mattered. And that, dear friends, may be the most fabulous thing of all.
Thank you for joining us for Top Spot 40 Music Docuseries. Discover all the stories behind the music at topspot40.com. Until next time, keep the music playing.